Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us. As noted on our media advisory, we have 4 groups here today to announce a partnership and policy initiative related to water quality in Wisconsin. And before turning things over to our spokespeople, I want to review some logistics. First, as always, please mute your microphones until the question and answer portion of the press conference. We want to make sure everybody can hear what's being said, so thank you for that. We'll start by hearing from a leader from each organization about the partnership, and then we'll bring in government affairs experts from each group to talk about the policy aspects of this initiative, and then we'll open things up for questions. We'll have 3 options for asking a question. You can type your question into the chat box. You can raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon along the top of the window for those of you on your computer. And number 3, if you're joining just by phone, we'll make sure to ask for questions that way after the others. And we'll do our best to address these in the order they come in. Lastly, most of our spokespeople will be available for one-on-one interviews after the press conference. I would just ask that you arrange those separately with those individuals and those organizations. You'll see contact information on a press release that will be distributed immediately after we wrap things up here. So I think we're ready to get started. In a minute, I'm gonna introduce Tom Crave, who's president of the Dairy Business Association, and then you'll hear from Mark Redston from Clean Wisconsin, Elizabeth Kaler from the Nature Conservancy in Wisconsin, and Matt Krueger from Wisconsin Land+Water. Tom?
All right, thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning. I'm Tom Crave, president of the Dairy Business Association. I'm also a dairy farmer and cheese processor in Waterloo, Wisconsin. It's a very important and exciting day. We are here to announce a major initiative to rethink how we protect our water and support our farmers in Wisconsin. For too long, these have been competing interests, especially when it comes to regulation. The disagreements over policy among other groups and among state leaders have often prevented real progress. It's time for change. We're calling on state decision makers to take bold action on water and farm-related policies. And just as importantly, we are committing ourselves to work together to find common ground. Nearly 2 years ago, our groups began talking about a closer working relationship. We learned that although we have not always been on the same side of policy issues, our missions overlap and our fundamental goals are the same. We all want and need clean water. We also want and need our strong agricultural community to be successful. Together, our organizations are proposing a set of policy principles to guide lawmakers and the administration in this effort. These principles provide a critical opportunity for Wisconsin to accelerate improvements to water quality and the ways we help farms adopt. You'll hear more policy details in a few minutes. Make no mistake, this will take an investment, a significant investment of funding, collaboration, focus, and commitment. But there's too much at stake not to move forward. The Dairy Business Association sees this initiative as a progression of our commitment to build relationships on environmental issues, notably in the farmer-led watershed conservation group model that we closely support. Our farmers face economic and regulatory challenges, but they understand the importance of continuous improvement on water quality. They are problem solvers by nature, and every day we are seeing more and more innovative conservation practices around the state. We are part of the solution, and we look forward to this new opportunity. I'd like to call on Mark for his comments, please.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us for the announcement of this new partnership. I want to echo what Tom just said and add that the challenges facing our drinking water and farming communities are serious and urgent. These water challenges really demand innovative solutions and better cooperation from all of us, including the groups on the call today. While the groups speaking today have not always been on the same side of policy debates, we've all had a long history of advocating for Wisconsin's environmental issues. In the case of Clean Wisconsin, we've been working alongside farm organizations on these important issues since our founding in 1970, 50 years ago. In recent years, our staff and supporters have seen firsthand the impacts of unsafe drinking water across rural Wisconsin and communities from Northeast Wisconsin down to Southwest Wisconsin. And as science improves and our understanding of the scope and the magnitude of Wisconsin's drinking water problems become more clear, so too has our urgency for increased action. Of course, while we see drinking water problems in all parts of our state, we also see many people working to address them. And that includes many farmers and our colleagues here today. So we know that we all share a common interest, and we know that many opportunities to improve our drinking water can also bring economic gains. And so with that, I'll just say that we're excited and ready to support this effort to do the hard work needed for clean drinking water and thriving farming communities. Thank you.
Elizabeth?
Thanks, Jamie. I'm Elizabeth Kaler, the Director for the Nature Conservancy in Wisconsin. The Nature Conservancy has been working to protect clean water in Wisconsin for 60 years by protecting land in important watersheds from the Bad and Brule rivers up north to the Pecatonica and the Mukwonago rivers in the south. About 15 years ago, we began working with the agricultural community, with state, county, and federal agencies, and with UW-Madison soil scientists to find ways to reduce the nutrient and soil loss from farm fields into our waterways by improving conservation practices on farms. Building on that, today we're partnering with the Dairy Business Association, DATCAP, and 6 farmer-led watershed groups to continue that on-the-ground work with farmers. The Conservancy is providing staff assistance, science support, and funding to help implement cover crops, reduce tillage, and other conservation practices on fields, and then measure outcomes and engage other farmers through field days and webinars. At the regional and national levels, we are also collaborating with the National Corn Growers Association on the Soil Health Partnership. This partnership brings together farmers in 16 states, including Wisconsin, who are conducting research on their farms to evaluate the economic and the soil health changes of a range of conservation practices. The Conservancy's involvement in this clean water initiative brings together our core work of land and water protection and our more recent work with agriculture to ensure that we all have access to clean water and that we do it in a way that ensures that farmers and our agricultural economy continue to thrive. The Nature Conservancy, we all at TNC are very excited to be part of this initiative, and we look forward to the important work that we will do together with everyone interested in clean water and a resilient agricultural community. And I will turn it over to Matt Krueger.
Good morning. I'm Matt Krueger, Executive Director of Wisconsin Land and Water. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan membership organization that represents county conservation professional staff and the elected committee members that oversee them. Our 800 boots on the ground members work on a local level in every county across the state to protect and enhance our soil and our water. This is the soil that literally supports every farm in the state and grows the food we all eat. It's the water that every single one of us rely upon every day. In our 67 years as an organization, we've seen devastating conservation challenges, such as soil erosion on a widespread scale. We've also seen great successes, such as the soil health and regenerative agricultural movements, which seek to build up the health of the soil and to inject life into it. Wisconsin Land and Water's members and the farms, landowners, and communities they serve have been working together for decades to address challenges and find solutions. Much like the farmers and landowners they work with, our members are practical. When they're called upon by a farmer whose crop field's been washed away by a flood, they're not concerned with political ideology or differences in opinion. They're concerned with solving problems, no matter how complicated or daunting. And we channel that same problem-solving mentality here today, as you've heard others mention. Water and agriculture are both central to our identity as a state. If you've been paying attention to the news in the past few years, you know that neither are doing great, nor by extension is our state's identity. We have too many people in rural Wisconsin who can't safely drink the water from their tap due to concerns over bacteria or nitrate. We have too many farms that have milked cows for the last time and sold off the herd. And there are heartbreaking stories related to both. In the absence of clean and safe drinking water and viable farms, our towns and communities cannot survive. So in this moment, we have a choice as to whether we continue the status quo and hope that by continuing down the same path, things will eventually turn around, or we come to the table and do the hard work of rolling up our sleeves, finding common ground, and working toward solutions. Almost 5 years ago, Wisconsin Land and Water convened a broad set of stakeholders from a diverse spectrum of interest groups, agencies, academic institutions, and engaged citizens, all toward moving Wisconsin forward together to chart a shared vision for our food, land, and water. All groups represented here today were a part of that effort, and that spirit of putting aside differences and working for clean water and resilient farms continues with our efforts here today, and we are excited to be a part of it. So thank you, and with that, I'll turn it back over to Jamie.
Thank you, Matt. Now we'll hear about the policy side of this initiative. I'd like to introduce first Scott Lasser, Water Program Director from Clean Wisconsin, to start. Scott?
All right, thanks, Jamie. Good morning, everyone. Awareness of the importance of clean drinking water has grown in the last couple of years, and it was good to see a renewed emphasis on this topic during the last legislative session. While the recommendations of the Speaker's Task Force on Water Quality were a good start, we need to see a much bigger investment in clean drinking water to ensure people can trust the water coming from their tap. We need to expand well testing and funding for well replacement and treatment. We also need more groundwater mapping to help us understand the sources of contamination, which include both agriculture and septic systems. This effort will require a significant financial investment, and there will need to be revenue generated from other sources to fund these important actions. Every Wisconsin citizen has a right to clean drinking water, and right now, too many citizens don't have it. We all need to invest in efforts to get them access to that clean drinking water as soon as possible. Thanks, and I will now turn it over to John Holavote from Dairy Business Association.
Thanks, Scott. Another aspect that we're looking at is reimagining the state's current Cafo program. Wisconsin needs a more effective way to permit farms in this system. In order to realize the future where all farms are successful while also meeting conservation standards, this program needs to have more resources to handle permitting, to deal with providing assistance to farmers, and to ensure compliance. For the good of farms and the environment, we would benefit from bringing more farms into the Cafo permitting process, but that is going to require the program to be much more efficient. This means making systematic changes to the way the current program operates and expecting improvements and improved engagement and improvements to the overall program from both the regulators and the regulated community. Now I'll turn it over to my colleague, Alec Medorsky from the Nature Conservancy.
Thanks so much, John. When it comes to supporting current conservation efforts and fostering innovation, we know many farmers and outside groups are already engaged in worthwhile conservation efforts. We should support these efforts, such as the current farmer-led watershed model. At the same time, we need to do more to measure these groups' success and to hold them accountable for the public resources they receive. There are also innovative thinkers with new ideas to improve agriculture's environmental impact. To foster innovation, we need to ensure regulatory clarity to allow for experimentation. We can also help by funding relevant research into these technologies and differing farm techniques. And I will now hand things back over to Matt Krueger from Wisconsin Land and Water.
Thanks, Alex. I'm going to speak a bit here about improving Wisconsin's non-point program. Almost 20 years ago, Wisconsin created its current program for addressing non-point pollution from agricultural sources. But those rules have still never been fully implemented, and the program has never been properly funded. Wisconsin should move toward holding all farms accountable for these standards, regardless of size, type, and availability of cost share money. This makes sense for the environment, but it is also fairer for farms. This change may need to be phased in over time or be associated with certain incentives, but we need to move in the direction now. To help with this change, it's even more important that county land and water efforts are properly funded. That includes more money for staffing and cost share as non-compliant farms adapt. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Jamie Mara.
Thank you again, Matt. Now we'll get to questions any of our journalists have. If you can please direct those to the person you would like to answer. And as a reminder, you can type the question into the chat box, raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon at the top of the screen. Or if you're joining by phone, give me a minute and I'll ask for any possible questions there. Are there any questions? Susan, I see your hands up.
It is up. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I'm not sure whom I should direct this to, but can you be a little bit more specific, or how specific are your are the elements of these measures that you want to see take hold? What are they, a little more specifically, or an example thereof, and the cost of that? And is this something you're pushing in the next legislative session, or taking to the governor, or both?
John, is that something you would answer?
Yeah, I'm happy to try to. So it absolutely is something that we plan on engaging with lawmakers with starting today and into the next legislative session, and in all four of the focus areas that we've described earlier. Some of these things are going to take a lot of work. They're going to take more stakeholders than just those that are here getting together to have conversations together about what that might look like, particularly when we talk about changes to the Cafo program or to the non-point program. Those are things where we're just starting the discussion, but it's a discussion that's frankly probably overdue in having. Other items, like some of the things that deal with supporting existing innovation efforts, and also promoting some things that we can do for clean water, to both in terms of research in that area, and also in terms of dealing with existing sources of contamination and existing wells that are having problems. Those are things that have a fiscal component, and some of those ideas are not new, but they're things that have not yet been fully realized. So we'll be taking those, building on those ideas from the past and driving them forward in this legislative session.
Is there anyone else that wants to add to that?
No one away. Oops.
Okay. Thank you, John. Larry Lee. Larry, do you have a question?
I have to hit all the unmute buttons first. It works better.
There you go.
All right. Early on, it was mentioned that not all four groups were on the same page of policy issues. Are there still some policy issues you don't agree on?
Scott or Matt, perhaps? Would you like to address that?
Sure, I can go ahead and take a stab at that. You know, what we want to try and focus on here is something that I think Tom and others alluded to in their opening remarks, which is that we've seen a familiar pattern with these issues in the past where we find areas to disagree on and those end up dominating the conversation. We decided to sit down and try to flip the script and talk about areas where we can find common ground. And it turns out there are quite a few of them. And we were able to lay those out with the 4 policy principles that we have put forward today. There will undoubtedly be issues in the future where we aren't seeing completely eye to eye, but the fact of the matter is there are a lot of core principles and actions that we do see eye to eye on and have found common ground on. And quite frankly, at this point, are looking to our decision makers to do the same going forward and to try to advance some of these efforts and address these important economic and public health and agricultural concerns.
Would anybody like to add to that? Okay. Thank you, Larry, for the question.
Could I just say one thing?
Yep.
2 years ago, just about 2 years ago, when Governor Evers took office, in his inauguration address, he declared the next year, which would be 2018, the year of clean water. And some of us at DBA said, boy, we have to be in that conversation. We don't want to be on the outside looking in. And so as we talked to some of these other groups that are here today, we thought this would be a good opportunity to engage with the state government in steering policy on clean water. And that's how it really came to be when Governor Evers brought it up, and we didn't want to be, as I said before, on the outside looking in when these conversations take place.
Thank you, Tom. Right. Chris Hubbuck, I see your hand is up.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. What I'm hearing is an expansion of, sounds like some grant programs as well as expansion of permitting programs that is going to require a lot more staff. Have you figured out a price tag for any of this or a ballpark?
Matt Krueger, would you like to answer that?
Sure. I'd say the short answer right now is no. You look at those four guiding principles that we've advanced, and it's pretty all-encompassing. I mean, there's a lot there, and we acknowledge that we have work to do yet to kind of tease out what some of those specific recommendations are and what the associated price tags are. If we kind of look at slicing those policy principles into different areas, there are areas where we know we have some numbers as it relates to cost sharing of conservation practices available for landowners. We're inadequate in the state. We don't meet the need. We don't meet the requested need. If you look at what the unmet requests are for county conservation staffing annually, we're short on that as well. So we can look at some of these specific areas and say, well, for instance, counties requested $17.9 million in DACP and DNR funding for the year 2021. And as of right now are set to get about $9.4 million for staffing and technical support. So there is no question that once we sit down and we kind of we look at all these different facets of what we're talking about, and we put a price tag to it, it's going to be significant. And I think we all know that, but I think we all know that the price of inaction is going to be more significant. And I think we're already starting to see that across the state. So it's a good question. I'm sorry I can't give you a more explicit answer at this point, but that's something we're certainly looking at as we figure out next steps with this initiative.
Thank you, Matt. Grace Conitzer, I see that your hand is up.
Hi, yeah. So Matt just addressed part of my question, but I was wondering more about just general funding. I know Elizabeth said earlier that the Nature Conservancy will be providing some funding for this, but can you be more specific about your sources for funding besides Nature Conservancy? Will you be getting more outside grants? Will you be getting funding specifically from DACAP and DNR? Just, things like that.
Alex, is that something you or Elizabeth that you want to talk about?
Sure, so I can chime in there. The Nature Conservancy over the last 5 years has invested over $1 million in sustainable agriculture in this state. And that's just our investment, not counting public sector dollars and private sector dollars from grants from other nonprofits into sustainable agriculture. DACAP, as Elizabeth mentioned, is a key partner in that, and we know that there's a positive feedback loop as we continue to invest and work together, conservationists and agriculture, on these projects. It makes them more appealing for other nonprofits to invest in terms of healthy soils. It's a good investment. We know there are carbon co-benefits as well to clean drinking water. So those are some of the things the Conservancy is working on right now.
Jamie, this is Scott. I can add to that a little bit. Great, thanks. So the funding discussion is going to be an important one, and it is, of course, always a difficult one, especially in the environment that we find ourselves in right now. But the fact of the matter is we have underinvested in water issues for a long time in Wisconsin, and we are where we are today because of that underinvestment. And as Matt alluded to, it's important that we balance the concerns about the cost of this issue with the recognition that there is a significant cost of inaction. Clean Wisconsin released a study in the last couple of months that looked at the public health risks associated with the widespread nitrate contamination that Wisconsin faces, and put a number on what those medical costs can add up to in a given year with the health complications that can result from this pollution. So we're going to have to take a hard look at all of the various sources of funding, both private and public sector, in the coming months to realize some of our clean water and agricultural success goals here. But the reality is it's going to take a significant and lasting and bold investment on the part of state leaders and decision makers to address these issues.
Thanks, Scott. Tom, do you want to speak about kind of the watershed group model and the support there? I think you're muted, Tom.
Here I am. All right, the watershed group that DBA has started mostly with the issues in Door and Kewaunee County, and Dairy Business Association thought that we should get involved to understand the issues for one thing. That's the first thing. So they did help organize the group. It's a farmer-led group, so there's really not much state funding, a little bit here and there, but it's self-driven by producers wanting to improve their own environment on their own farm and in their neighborhood where they live and drink the water. So that has grown now that Dairy Strong is supporting 6 farmer-driven watersheds. And what Dairy Strong is doing is trying to help gather the data that these groups have gathered by doing different projects. So we can look at the results and see what works and what doesn't work. Now, there are more than 6 county or regional watershed, farmer-driven watershed groups in the state, but Dairy Strong is involved with 6 of them. But there are many more than that around the state coming up with great results through doing on-farm trials and research.
Thank you, Tom. Anyone else would like to add to that? Please jump in. If not, we'll move to the next question. Okay, Larry Lee. Larry, are you there? I see you're muted.
It looks like it muted itself. Okay, here we go. John had mentioned that there may be more need to bring more farms into the Cafo program. Capos are already the most regulated of the farms, and I'm wondering if your group of 4 organizations has discussed how that might take place, maybe with fewer animal units to qualify as a Cafo, or maybe it's, if they have a high cap well, or, what might the guidelines be for bringing more farms into the Cafo program?
I can handle that first, and then others might chime in, Jamie, if that's all right. Larry, thanks for the question. I think right now our main focus on sort of driving more participation in that program is through improving the program itself and making it more efficient. There are many farms who right now have made the conscious choice to hover right at the limit for what would be acceptable in terms of animal units before qualifying for Cafo status. And the reason they make that choice is because the program is intimidating and to them, and also they're concerned about sort of the regulatory cliff they would face. I think there are things we can do to help farms in that position to prepare themselves should they ever decide to make that transition, so that it is more of a natural progression in their business versus something to be avoided or dreaded in making that switch. A lot of these folks, if they are going to have another generation, for example, come back and work on the farm, they're going to think about making an expansion. And for them, that is a choice of, do we take that plunge into the Cafo world or not? And I think one of our goals, at least here, is to say that we can make that a clearer choice for them. At the same time, there are things we can do to make farms who aren't Cafos both probably do more or have more expected of them, which at the same time will also prepare them if and when they ever make that choice, or if they never make that choice, but we'll all be better for it. And some of that probably involves some of the changes that we could make to the non-point program that regulates, in theory, all farms of all sizes and all types.
Thanks, John. Anyone else like to add to what John said? Okay, we'll move to the next question. Chris, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, you talked about some of the benefits for the ag economy and farmers in particular. I'm wondering if you could talk about some of those, maybe, I mean, beyond just the fact that clean water benefits everyone. Are there economic benefits to be achieved through this?
Who would like to address that?
I'm happy to take a crack at this one as well, and then turn it over for others who might have something to add. There absolutely are economic benefits to farmers participating in this. Tom Crave did an excellent job of talking about our involvement with the farmer-led watershed groups. One of the hallmarks of that program is that we're not just asking farmers to do it for the sake of just the environment, although that's an important reason to do it by itself. But much of what they're engaging in, whether that's cover crop practices or other ideas to build soil health over time, those are investments in the future of their farms. It's not just about environmental sustainability, it's also about economic sustainability, that we want to keep farms on the landscape, sort of echoing the comments made by Matt Krueger earlier as well, that we're losing farms too each and every year, losing land and production each and every year. And that's a trend that we also want to stem and try to prevent as much as possible. So I think there are things in the pipeline to help with that. Last session, we also passed a nutrient trading bill that might provide a new revenue stream for some farms and organizations like the farmer-led watershed groups, perhaps others, that this group might partner with to find a new revenue stream for those engaged in agriculture, while at the same time partnering with others who would rely on those partners in ag to help them meet their permit requirements under the Clean Water Act. So I think there are tangible examples of how this is not just good for the environment, but can also help farmers' bottom lines.
I can jump in here too as well. One of the things that, just to give an example, one of the things that we're talking about with the non-point program, in 2002, the non-point program was redesigned, and there were baseline standards created, performance standards. They're basically expectations that all farms are expected to meet. One of those standards, the one that we have the best data on 18 years in, is the extent to which cropland is covered by nutrient management plans. And I think everybody would agree that a nutrient management plan is it's a good business plan for farms for efficient use of resources and expenditures on fertilizers and gas and all these sorts of things to get the best yield for the inputs. There is a benefit to protecting soil and to protecting water quality, though that isn't explicitly the intent of those plans. Well, 18 years in, we know that of Wisconsin's 9 million acres of cropland, about 37% are covered by a nutrient management plan. I think everybody on this call would agree that that probably isn't acceptable, and that there is a benefit to farms to having a nutrient management plan in place. And that figure says nothing about the quality of the plan, the extent to which it's implemented. So that's a perfect example of one thing that we're looking at. We want to look at more and think about how can we use these standards or incentives to better provide farms the ability to keep soil in place and keep their farms profitable and viable. The other thing I would say that I think is just bears mentioning, it's not an exact parallel, but in the 1920s and 30s, Wisconsin was the start of our conservation movement in Coon Valley, Wisconsin, where we took our first watershed approaches to conservation. And at that time, we saw erosion on a scale that we'd never seen before. Gullies 40 feet deep, and it was communities losing their identity, farms literally having the ground below them erode. And what that took was a large investment and an intentional investment, kind of saying, we're going to take a new approach in helping farms keep soil in place and keep themselves profitable. So like I said, this isn't an exact parallel to that, but I think we have that in our DNA here in Wisconsin. And I think what we're asking for is sitting down and looking at that and thinking about how can we use the suite of tools, policy tools, incentives that we have available to us to better allow farms to thrive and to protect the environment at the same time.
Thank you, Matt.
I'd just like to echo some of what Jon and Matt had to say, particularly when we think about Wisconsin's agriculture economy. A couple of things we know are that farming techniques impact non-point pollution, but our Wisconsin farmers are competing with farmers in many cases for their commodities across the Midwest and internationally. And if you look at some of our neighboring states in the Midwest, Ohio with an H2O program they recently passed that really promotes sustainable agriculture. There are similar programs in Minnesota. We're seeing state governments in some of our competitor and partner states really make strong investments in agriculture. And if we're going to keep up economically, we in Wisconsin have to look at making some similar investments. As Matt Krueger just said, we know through the farmer-led watershed groups and other sources that farmers understand that best sustainable practices are really key to staying in business and staying profitable in the long term. Things like massive soil erosion are not helpful to farmers in the long term. And we do have a bit of a proof of concept here that John Holyvote mentioned. The bill on nutrient trading that was passed last session to help connect point and non-point sources of pollution is something where we see The state can think innovatively, it can pass bipartisan legislation and create a new revenue stream for farmers that will also result in cleaner drinking water for everyone in this state.
Thank you, Alex.
Jamie, this is Scott. I'd just like to add a little bit more to that.
Sure.
I also wanted to flag another concern and another separate but related issue here. Climate change is something that has gotten a little bit of attention in the last week because the governor's task force on climate change released their recommendations last week. Included in those recommendations was a section on agriculture. And the fact of the matter is that climate change presents a clear and present threat to agriculture and the sort of common practices that we see used in agriculture today, whether that's increased flood risk and extreme weather events that can perpetuate things like erosion and nutrient leaching, to longer windows of seasons for pests or diseases or different environmental conditions that can perpetuate those types of challenges. The task force report included a whole host of suggestions and opportunities for agriculture to engage on both addressing climate change and also adapting to the reality that we are already seeing impacts from it. But many of the practices, in fact, that will help address the water issues we face go hand in hand with addressing to and adapting to and becoming more resilient in the face of climate change. So there's an opportunity for all of us to help farmers both prepare for a more challenging future in the face of climate impacts and also reduce those impacts by mitigating some of those changes in the longer run.
Thank you, Scott. Are there any questions on the phone? Any reporters on the phone? Okay. Any final questions from anyone? All right, we'll wrap things up then. Thanks everybody for participating. For the journalists, there will be a recording of this on YouTube a little bit later, and we'll send a link out. There will be a press release that is distributed within the next few minutes. And again, if you would like to arrange for an interview with one of the spokespeople individually, that's definitely an option. Please follow up with one of the communications folks at the organizations. You see the contact information in the chat box. It will also be on the press release. Thank you again, everyone. Have a great day.